Welcome everyone to Rolling on the River, developing multimodal solutions in a constrained urban environment. My name is Rick Plenge with HDR. I have over 23 years of experience in the multimodal and transportation fields. I currently co-lead our National Complete Streets Practice Group and also lead our National New England Traffic and Planning Practice. A little bit about the River Street Corridor project. The project limits, if you're familiar with Cambridge, extends from basically the Charles River and Memorial Drive into the heart of Cambridge at Central Square in Mass Ave. A little bit of project context. The project extends basically again from the river, but further west. It actually interfaces with the I-90 interchange project, which is currently under planning development, and the Alston Landing project, which will dramatically reconfigure the I-90 interchange and straightening that alignment. So this project has basically two parts. One is a subsurface aspect where we're going to be upgrading a lot of the public and private utilities along the corridor. There's a lot of unfortunate age-associated impacts with some of the infrastructure on the corridor, and this process will be dramatically upgrading that interface. The project will also be addressing a lot of the surface scope aspects, which include improved bicycle accommodations, improved transit access, looking at opportunities to maximize tree canopy, improving general accessibility, to name a few. The project also has the opportunity to really improve the urban design realm. At the northern end of the project, where the project interfaces with Mass Ave and Central Square, is Carl Barron Plaza, which is shown in this image here. This image shows the blend of community and people watching that occurs, and also the interface with the transit hub with the Red Line and 5 different transit bus routes that service this plaza. A little bit about the existing conditions on the corridor. The corridor is about 50 feet wide from a right-of-way standpoint and only 33 feet wide from curb to curb. This corridor actually serves as the counterpart to the Western Avenue project, which was reconstructed almost 5 years ago to provide a similar enhanced multimodal corridor. So as we undertook this process about 2 years ago, we had a lot of guiding policies and principles to kind of follow. This project realized a lot of the past efforts, including the Vision Zero plan, some of the Better Bus Project initiatives the MBTA was putting on, and also a lot of the sustainable goals as far as tree canopy, reducing climate change impacts, things like that. Some steps in the design process, as you typically would expect. We identified initial issues right off the bat, and from there we established a vision through a very collaborative stakeholder process. Right now we're in the final stages of the complete design and going to 100% design here this summer and looking to go to add in early fall. So a little bit about the project background, just to give you a street level view. This is looking from Mass Ave east towards Central Square. And you can see kind of the existing conditions. You can see the pavement and sidewalk facilities are pretty poor shape. And as you get into closer to Central Square, kind of halfway down the corridor, the land use context also starts to change to become more of a denser urban realm. And then you get into Central Square, which is a hub of activity. As you can see, you start seeing some of the transit services that's provided, a lot more pedestrian demand. I didn't mention this corridor actually serves as a designated hazardous material route for the I-90 corridor, so no trucks are allowed to go into the city of Boston past this exit due to some restrictions with a Prudential Tower along the corridor. So a little bit of background about how people are currently traveling along the corridor. Roughly about 70% of the traffic on the corridor is by automobile, and about 15 to 20% is by transit, and then about 15% roughly is by walking or biking. So some quick overview of vehicle operations. This corridor experiences a little bit of congestion, but mostly at the ends of the corridor. As you get closer to some of the signalized intersections, especially as you can see here on the right around Central Square, where there's a lot of closely spaced signalized intersections, the queuing can become quite extensive during certain time frames. About the transit operations, I mentioned there's 5 buses that currently service the area, and again, a lot of them either circulate or terminate around the Central Square hub here at Mass Ave. Another thing that we're in kind of respect to the Vision Zero goals the city has, very aware of the travel speeds along the corridor. So we did a lot of speed studies to understand travel behavior. And as we found in some of the areas that did not have signalized intersections and had larger gaps between those intersections, speeds were much higher. And obviously we're looking at opportunities to reduce that speed and get it closer to the posted speed limit of 20 miles per hour in these areas. I don't think I'll touch on more, but existing curbside uses was really important. This corridor was fairly unique for the city of Cambridge, where they had a lot of unregulated parking. That means there was no posted signing restrictions from either permit parking. There was no parking meters. It was basically first come, first serve. And it led to a lot of misuse by people that are coming into the area and not allowing residents to actually use it for parking or businesses for parking. A little bit about our public engagement process. So we had an extensive number of public meetings that were really well attended, and this is again pre-COVID. We're able to do a lot of in-person, kind of high-touch, interactive discussions, and a lot of people were able to drop comments and have very fruitful discussions with the project team members. We also had an online interface, and this became more prominent as we kind of came into the heart of the pandemic last year. And this is something that was very informative to provide not only feedback on existing conditions, but also on some of our designs that we were trying to get feedback on from the community. We also had a very established working group throughout the process, and is still ongoing. We're actually bouncing ideas off them, kind of identifying, based on their local community knowledge, what are some of the things that we're maybe not seeing as designers, and making sure that we're integrating that into the ultimate product that we're developing. So some guidance that came out of those conversations with the various stakeholders, we were looking to promote a safe and inclusive, so much a human scale development of a project, very multimodal, activated from not only a urban realm, but also from a business standpoint, and obviously resilience is very important in the city of Boston and Cambridge. Conceptual design, just want to talk a little bit about the givens about the project. I mentioned that the city had a goal of providing a separated bikeway as part of their cycling safety ordinance. Also looking at maximizing tree planting opportunities, also maintaining the hazardous material truck routes, to name a few. So as I kind of alluded to this whole presentation, this is talking about a very constrained urban environment, and this is something that we had to deal with on a routine basis, where we're trying to achieve, accessible sidewalk routes while maintaining existing trees, and we had to be fairly creative about how we address some of these pinch points. In some locations, we did have to narrow the sidewalk down, or we're able to use some surfaces in the actual tree wells that provides a hard walking surface, but is still permeable. Similarly, the underground subsurface infrastructure was equally challenging. There was 2 30 to 36-inch gas mains along the corridor that resulted in a lot of limitations as far as what you could plant on top of it, or how other utilities could interface with that. So we had to be fairly creative on what type of infrastructure was placed on top of that, those gas mains. So a quick design walkthrough. Memorial Drive to Putnam Avenue, which is kind of the western end coming off of Memorial Drive in the river. You can see what we identified as a solution was to actually take out a lane of traffic. Again, the community here is pretty progressive. They wanted to be moving more people efficiently and not just cars. So we saw the opportunity based on traffic operations and some of the improvements we could make from a signal phasing and timing standpoint to actually reduce the lane of traffic for vehicles, but actually replace that with a dedicated bus lane here that basically starts at this transition point of Putnam Avenue. We also are incorporating additional blue bike, which is our bike share platform in the Boston metro area, and also enhancing some of the transit stops. So here's a quick image of what it looks like today in this section. This is what we're looking at in the future with a designated separated bikeway on the right-hand side of the road, having a dedicated transit lane, single vehicle lane, and enhanced tree canopy and sidewalk facilities that are accessible while maintaining the underground subsurface infrastructure. Further up the corridor, this is in Pleasant Street. This is a location that had the opportunity to kind of reconfigure this intersection, had a very distinct skew angle, which were leading to a lot of crashes and higher speed exits off the corridor. We were able to tighten that intersection geometry up, provide space for activation, whether it be cafe seating, local restaurants in the area would definitely benefit from that, as well as just general urban design and placemaking. Here's an image of the corridor in the spot today. This is what it looks like potentially in the future. One thing I didn't point out throughout all the corridor, in the locations where there's no signalized intersections on the approaches, we are providing raised crosswalks and bikeways across those side street locations so that basically the multimodal aspects are maintained at the same elevation as the surrounding sidewalk, and it really reinforces a better controlled crossing by drivers in those conflict areas. One thing I wanted to touch on a little bit more, which is somewhat of a new topic to many, is called the flex zone. And this is what many people kind of refer to as your typical parking lane. But the City of Cambridge and others really realize that this is at a much greater use than just basically storing cars, but has the opportunity to support some of the green infrastructure aspects, some of the pedestrian safety. This is an example with a bioswale incorporated into a bump out. Food trucks, TNC operations, and then activity areas for supporting local businesses and commerce. This is a graphic that kind of shows a proportion of existing flex zone allocation, and you can see metered unregulated parking as the majority of it. And we basically repartitioned that in the future to provide enhanced bus stops, more curb extensions, greater activation, more greenery, to provide a much more balanced approach than just storing more vehicles. So some urban design streetscape elements. One thing I wanted to point out here, we're obviously looking at accessibility improvements, but I mentioned earlier that some of these confined pinch points, this area here on the tree, where we had some pinch points in the sidewalk, we were able to use a application of FlexiPave, which is a kind of a permeable surface, but it does provide a hard walking surface that allows someone to negotiate if they do need to kind of travel outside the sidewalk. Street trees, in accordance with the city's goals for maintaining the tree canopy and reducing urban heat island effect, was very important, and something we're very sensitive to about minimizing the loss of any trees. A lot of trees on the corridor we identified during an initial tree survey were found to be in generally good health, but a few were identified as potential candidates for removal just based on the poor health. But we can see here overall we dramatically increased the overall number of trees and the overall caliper of trees that will be provided along the corridor. I wanted to wrap things up with the Carl Barron Plaza, which again was at the east end at the Central Square location. This is again a similar community process that was done in concert with the overall corridor design, and involved a lot of interactions both on the ground and virtually, a lot of community engagement with some of the social service providers in the area, a lot of in-person surveys, and actually go-to events where we actually staged informational booths out in the plaza to kind of get people walking by in their daily routine. Some of the design objectives and themes that came out of that experience, looking at maximizing comfort, really creating identity for the place, for the area, looking at making sure that the access and accessibility was important, and making sure that all people had the ability to use it, and also looking at the opportunity to not only engage the existing users of the facility, and a lot of the social service aspects that are provided there, but also bring in a new mix of use for some people that traditionally avoided this space based on some of the people that typically hang out in this area. Here's some examples of the outdoor days of engagement that we did over the course of a couple summer months. And you can see there's a lot of the dot exercises and getting people's preference on what type of things they'd like to see, how they'd like to see the area programmed. We also had a similar interface on an online presence with a Wikimap interface to really get people's thoughts on what they liked and what they didn't like. We also did a lot of people tracking, we call it, and this is basically identifying kind of the primary desire lines that people in this, the wider lines kind of signify where there's the primary routes. You can see this area right here is kind of the bisected busway, and looking at opportunities to improve upon that. You can see the main pedestrian routes are along River Street, along Magazine Street here, and then along Mass Ave. What we heard, this area is kind of the outdoor living room for some of the people in the community. There is a lot of social services that are provided in the area, which obviously draw a certain type of pedestrian to the area that we need to be respectful of, and obviously trying to be inclusive of everyone creates a lot of trade-off discussion that is needed. There's a lot of traffic in the area that makes a lot of loud and kind of noisy and somewhat inhabitable areas for people to actually want to linger. So that's something we want to consider. So these are a few things that we were definitely challenged with addressing. From a physical environment standpoint, we also wanted to make sure that we were providing good circulation, accessibility, trying to integrate some placemaking aspects, making sure that this is a maintainable surface as far as reducing the amount of long-term maintenance on this. Also making sure that we had clear defined circulation routes for all the different modes that interface here. So just touching on the busway, again, it really bisected the plaza and really made it almost unusable from a placemaking standpoint. So that was one thing that we were really trying to focus on, of how we could kind of basically break this area apart and identify in kind of distinct areas where some of these applications of the transit interface could be redistributed to, which I'll touch on in a minute. This area had a lot of closely spaced intersections, both signalized and unsignalized, which led to a lot of poor driver behavior from running stop signs, running some of the signalized intersections just based on not being able to react in time. You can see it's a very heavily transit focused and pedestrianized area that we need to address. Also, just the general corridor elements of providing a high quality sidewalk and separated bikeway facility need to be integrated, and this is on the approach to the Carl Barron Plaza area that a lot of people currently are riding on the sidewalk, unfortunately, and this is something that we want to look at trying to promote and again balance all the different users of the facilities. So some other options that we need to consider at all times is defining the direct pedestrian routes, maximizing tree canopy, providing transit shelters for all the bus stops. There was a lot of layover requirements for buses that were actually not in operation. They're just basically, from a scheduling standpoint, we're laying over in space to allow for that operator to take a restroom break or kind of catch up on their schedule areas. So also looking at separated bike facilities that need to be integrated into the plaza as well. So the options that we developed here, and I'll touch on one in a little bit more detail, but then you can kind of see how the bikeway here shown in white interfaces with the plaza. You can see a pedestrian route that's kind of in gray in most of these. Some of these areas are the transit shelter. There's kind of more the end of the plaza here that is opportunities for placemaking and programming. And what we've come up with in our preferred option is a variation of this option C, which really provides a prominent gateway structure here at the end, with a bikeway that kind of bisects the area. You have a sidewalk that kind of parallels it with a slight separation through a green strip here from landscaping. Also, you have these programmable spaces here at the ends of the plaza near Mass Ave, but also here against this adjacent building near Green Street. You can see some of the bus stops that are being, shelters that are being provided, and then you have the bus stops here. Some of the layover spaces that were currently being provided in this previous kind of bisected transit way have been reallocated to further up on River Street. We actually kind of created some carving out of a sidewalk area that was kind of wider than it needed to be to provide that area for those layovers to occur. So moving on, this is a couple Birdseye images of the space, and this is something that you can kind of see the designated bus stops along both corridors. You can see the enhanced transit realm. I didn't mention it, but we actually took this roadway on Green Street here and actually made it a bus only for this one block and actually routed all the vehicle traffic further back. You can see up here on the far side of this church to actually increase the separation for signalized intersections with automobile traffic. So that actually dramatically improved the operations of the corridor by just kind of pulling those intersections further apart and allowing for better spacing of the signalized intersections. Here's some ground plane perspective views. You can see the vehicles kind of the bicycles kind of traveling through the corridor and the overhang for the gateway structure. Down at the Mass Ave end, we have some protected intersection treatments for the bikeways that interface with Mass Ave. And then there's some of the plaza and placemaking aspects that are provided. So next steps, right now we are finalizing 100% design. The project is set to be advertised in the fall of 2021. And then I just wanted to provide some links. I know this is a lot of information to kind of download right now, but there's a link to our project website. And the second link is a recent online public meeting that we had done through the ArcGIS Story Map platform, which shows a lot more of the overall process that we went through. It still provides some of the connections to the interactive mapping that we had, and would highly recommend you guys taking a look at that if you have time. So with that, I will wrap things up and open it up to questions. Thank you very much.